definition 1.1. So what is statistics? Statistics is the summary or descriptive measures computed from a set of data. Like for example 1.1, okay, we are talking about the number of motorcycle travel in an expressway for a 2-hour period. So we have 1211 for the first period, 1321, and so on. So this is the data sets. So but statistics is talking about how are we going to describe the data. Like for example, you can find mean, you can find medians, you can find the standard deviation to describe, okay, the characteristic of the data. This is what we call statistics. Okay, definition 1.2, okay, we are talking about populations. So when we conduct statistical analysis or a study involves statistical analysis, first we have to know what is our study population. If you're talking about, I want to know about the body weight of students in Malaysia, so means that our population is all students in Malaysia is our populations. Okay, so whatever measure, okay, you measure from the populations, okay, we call it parameters. You measure, like for example, I want to measure, okay, the means or the average of the student body weight in Malaysia. If you're capable to measure all students in Malaysia their body weight, then the average you measure is what we call it parameters. And of course, in relatives, we won't engage with the population. We will draw samples from the populations, okay, then means that the sample is much smaller than a populations. So whatever measurement we measure, like for example, this time we say average, we also can apply the same way to measure the average of the samples. So if we measure, okay, the students within the samples, okay, we don't call it parameter, we call it statistics. So a random samples means that, like for example, if we have 1 million populations, we are only select 1,000 from 1 million. So you can select any samples and you will select randomly. So this is what we call a random samples. When you close your eye, you get 1,000 from 1 million. You select randomly, then this sample is what we call random samples. And definition 1.7 is a variables. Variable is a very important concept in statistics. How do we define like for example, the samples? So we can define their body weight, we can define their age, we can define the color of their shirt. Okay, so this is what we call variable. Like for example, 1.4, among all motorcycles, how many percent are super bike? So the type of motorcycles is what we call a variable in example 1.4. It can be a normal bike, it can be the super bikes. And the variable can be measured or can be classified as quantitative variables or qualitative variables. For quantitative variables, okay, means that, okay, some is a variables which is measurables, okay, okay, and these quantitative variables can be divided into two types. Either it can be defined as discrete quantitative variables and continuous quantitative variables. Discrete quantitative variable, like for example, the number of motorcycles. We count, okay, there are 1,000 motorcycles, there are 22 motorcycles. We never have 100.1. So that's why, okay, the number of motorcycles is one of the good example for you to understand what is the discrete quantitative variables. Continuous quantitative variables, like for example, travel speed. So you want to know how fast a motorcycle travels. So travel speed can be like 28 km per hour. It can be like continue like 100.5 km per hour. So that's why it cannot be counted, but it can be measured. So that's why we call it continuous quantitative variables. So definition 1.11 is another definition is we can define data as a qualitative variables, or we call it categorical variables. So this kind of variables cannot be measured, but can be classified or can be observed. Okay, like for example, the color of the motorcycles, the brand of the motorcycles, the gender of the motorcyclist. So all these variables cannot be measured, but we can classify them into different types.